Hello, my name is Audrey. I'm from Gatineau, Quebec, and I'm here today to read chapter 29 of Jane of Lantern Hill, and this is my daughter, Ariane, who has been my reading partner for both read-alongs. We have read Rill of Ingleside, and now Ariane is going to do us a short reading of Jane of Lantern Hill, which in front is Les Vacances de Jeanne. Alors Ariane, est-ce que tu me fais une petite imitation de grand-mère Kennedy?
Oui. Elle aura bientôt tout oublié, dit sa grand-mère. Et on ne parlera plus de Lantern Hill.
Merci, Ariane.
De rien.
So Jane of Lantern Hill, chapter 29. She'll soon forget everything about Lantern Hill, said Grandmother. Mother wasn't so sure. She felt the change in Jane, as did everybody. Uncle David's family thought Jane much improved. Aunt Sylvia said Victoria had actually become able to get through a room without danger to the furniture. And Phyllis was a shade less patronizing, though with plenty of room for improvement yet. I heard you weren't barefoot down there, she said curiously. Of course, said Jane. All the children do in summer. Victoria's gone quite Pea Island, said Grandmother, with her bitter little smile, much as if she had said, Victoria's gone quite savage. Grandmother had already learned a new way to get under Jane's skin. It was to say little biting things about the island. Grandmother employed it quite mercilessly. She felt that Jane, in so many respects, had somehow slipped beyond her power to hurt. All the color still went out of Jane in Grandmother's presence, but she was not thereby reduced to the old flabbiness. Jane had not been châtelaine of Lantern Hill and the companion of a keen, mature intellect all summer for nothing. A new spirit looked out of her hazel eyes. Something that was free and aloof, something that was almost beyond Grandmother's power to tame or hurt. All the venom of her stings seemed unable to touch this new Jane, except when she sneered at the island. Because in a very real sense, Jane was still living on the island. This helped to take the edge of her first 2 weeks of unbearable homesickness. While she was practicing her scales, she was listening for the thunder of the breakers on Queen's Shore. While she ate her meals, she was waiting for Dad to come in from one of his long hikes with Happy trotting at his heels. When she was alone in the big gloomy house, she was companioned by the Peters. Who could have imagined that a couple of cats 1,000 miles away could be such comforts? When she lay awake at night, she was hearing all the sounds of her island home. And while she was reading the Bible chapter to Grandmother and Aunt Gertrude in that terrible, unchanged drawing room, she was reading it to Dad on the old watchtower. I should prefer a little more reverence in reading the Bible, Victoria, said Grandmother. Jane had been reading an old Hebrew war tale, as Father would have read it, with a trumpet clang of victory in her voice. Grandmother looked at her vindictively. It was plain that reading the Bible was no longer a penance to Jane. She seemed positively to enjoy it. And what could Grandmother do about it? Jane had made a list of the months that must pass before return to the island on the back of her arithmetic notebook and smiled when she ticked off September. She had felt very reluctant to go back to St. Agatha's, but in a short time she found herself saying one day in amazement, I like going to school. She had always felt vaguely left out, excluded at St. Agatha's. Now, for some reason unknown to her, she no longer felt so. It was as if she had become a comrade and a leader overnight. The girls of her class looked up to her. The teachers began to wonder why they had never before suspected what a remarkable child Victoria Stewart was, why she was simply full of executive ability. And her studies were no longer a tribulation. They had become a pleasure. She wanted to study as hard as she could to catch up with Dad. Dim ghosts of history, exquisite, unhappy queens, grim old tyrants, had become real. Marked poems in the reader she and Dad had read together were full of meaning for her. The ancient lands where they had roamed in fancy were places she knew and loved. It was so easy to learn about them. Jane brought on no more bad reports. Mother was delighted, but Grandmother did not seem overly pleased. She picked up a letter one day, which Jane was writing to Polly Jimmy Joan, glanced over it, dropped it with disdain. Phlox is not spelled F-L-O-X, Victoria, but I suppose it does not matter to your haphazard friends how you spell. Jane blushed. She knew perfectly well how to spell flocks, but there was so much to tell Polly, to ask Polly, so many messages to send to the people in that far, dear island by the sea. She just scribbled away furiously, without thinking. "Polly Garland is the best speller at Lantern Corner School," said Jane. "Oh, I have no doubts whatever, that she has all the backwood virtues," said Grandmother. Grandmother's sneers could not poison Jane's delight in the letters she got from the island. They came as thick as autumn leaves in Vallombroso. Somebody at Lantern Hill or Hungry Cove or the Corners was always writing to Jane. The Snowbeams sent composite letters, dreadfully spelled and blotted, written paragraph about. They possessed the knack of writing the most amusing things, illustrated along the edges, with surprisingly well-done thumbnail sketches by Shingle. Jane always wanted to shriek with laughter over the Snowbeam letters. Elder Tommy had the mumps. Fancy Elder Tommy with the mumps. Shingle had fancied it in a few side-splitting curves. The tailboard of Big Donald's cart had come out when he was going up Little Donald's hill, and all his turnips had rolled out and down the hill, and was he mad? The pigs had gotten into the Corners graveyard. Min's ma was making a silk quilt. Jane immediately began saving patches for Min's ma's quilt. Ding Dong's dog had torn the whole seat out of Andy Person's second-best trousers. The frost had killed all the dahlias. Stepper Yard was having boils. There had been a lovely lot of funeral this fall. Old Mrs. Douglas McKay had died, and people who were at the funeral said she looked perfectly gorgeous. The Jimmy Jones baby had laughed at last. The big tree on Big Donald's hill had blown down. Jane was sorry for that. She had loved that tree. "We miss you just awful, Jane. Oh, Jane, we wish you could be here for Halloween night." Jane wished it too. If one could but fly in the darkness over rivers and mountains and forests to the island for just that one night. What fun they would have running around, putting turnip and pumpkin jack-o'-lanterns on gate posts, and perhaps helping to carry off somebody's gate. "What are you laughing at, darling?" asked Mother. "A letter from home," said Jane thoughtlessly. "Oh, Jane Victoria, isn't this your home?" cried Mother piteously. Jane was sorry she had spoken, but she had to be honest. Home? A little house looking seaward, a white gull, ships going up and down, spruce woods, misty barrens, salt air cold from leagues of gulf, quiet, silence. That was home, the only home she knew, but she hated to hurt Mother. Jane had begun to feel curiously protective about Mother, as if somehow she must be shielded and guarded. Oh, if she could only talk things over with her mother, tell her everything about Dad, find out everything. What fun it would be to read those letters to Mother. She did read them to Jody. Jody was as much interested in the Lantern Hill folks as Jane herself. She began sending messages to Polly and Shingle and Min. The elms around 60 Gay turned a rusty yellow. Far away, the red leaves would be falling from the maples. The autumn mists would be coming in from the sea. Jane opened her notebook and ticked off October. November was a dark, dry, windy month. Jane scored a secret triumph over Grandmother one week of it. "Let me make the croquettes for lunch, Mary," she begged one day. Mary consented very skeptically, remembering that there was plenty of chicken salad in the refrigerator if the croquettes were ruined. But they were not. They were everything croquettes should be. Nobody knew who had made them, but Jane had the fun of watching folks eat them. Grandmother took a second helping. Mary seems to have learned how to make croquette properly at last," she said. Jane wore a puppy on Armistice Day because Dad was a DS. She was hungry to hear about him, but she would not ask her island correspondents. They must not know she and Dad did not exchange letter. But sometimes there was a bit about him in some of the letters, perhaps only a sentence or two. She lived for them and by them. She got up in the night to reread the letters they were in. And every Saturday afternoon she shut herself up in her room and wrote him a letter, which she sealed up and asked Mary to hide in her trunk. She would take them all to Dad next summer and let him read them while she read his diary. She made a little ritual of dressing up to write to Dad. It was delightful to be writing to him while the wind howled outside, two fathers so far away and yet so near, telling him everything you had done that week, all the little intimate things you loved. The first snow came one afternoon, as she wrote, in flakes as large as butterflies. Would it be snowing on the island? Jane hunted up the morning paper and looked to see what the weather report in the Maritimes was. Yes, cold with showers of snow, clearing and cold at night. Jane shut her eyes and saw it. Great soft flakes falling over the grey landscape against the dark spruces. Her little garden a thing of fairy beauty. Egg flakes in the empty robin's nest she and Shingle knew of. The dark sea around the white land. Clearing and cold at night. Frosty stars gleaming out in still frostier evening blue over quiet fields, thinly white with snow. Would Dad remember to let the Peters in? Jane ticked off November.